Let's see if there's any stragglers, and we'll close the doors on them. All right, are we ready to go? I guess we are. We get the high sign from the site manager, or whatever you want to call him there. Bruce, right. All right. Who's got a question, comment, consideration, complaint, problem, issue, subject?
All kinds of them, can't solve them.
Can't solve them. What do you want to solve? All kinds of stuff, huh? Like?
Not too much specific.
Oh, okay. General complaints or general concerns or what?
I can't do anything about it, but I'm sure I'd like to see that the situation over there in Ukraine is on.
Ah, okay.
It's a worrisome thing to me.
Is it? Okay.
That would be a pitfall for us to get into.
Well, you have to look at the history of the area. You have to look at the problems. The problems with these things have to do with people draw the so-called experts, if you want to call them that, or the diplomats anyway, the government officials, whatever. The winners of various conflicts redrawing boundary lines, right? That's what it has to do with. There's a lot of examples throughout history. And I don't want to go back too far. Let's just go back, for example, let's just go back to after First World War. That's as far as we really need to go to see the problem with this. If you remember, the First World War was actually begun because of strife between what we know as Serbia and what we know as Bosnia in the Balkans. The Balkans, remember, are those nations or those cultures or people on the other side of the sea from Italy. So you've got the boot of Italy hanging down, okay, right? Then this area, which historically is known as Dalmatia, all right, it's a crossing point of cultures, okay? So Roman culture, Greek culture, Arab or Turkish culture, Russian culture, it all kind of melds right there in what's called the Balkans, okay? And they're small countries. They're relatively weak countries. That is, they don't have a lot of population. Therefore, they don't have a lot of industry. Therefore, they don't have a lot of big armies. They can't impose their will on anybody else. All right. So they tend to get gobbled up, or they tend to get overpowered by big countries like France and England and Germany and Russia and Austria, all right? Well, what happened in this area, okay, is that these countries had alliances with various of the big powers, okay? Like I say, Austria, Germany, England, France, Russia, all right? And everybody's, of course, jockeying for power and position. So a Serbian shoots a guy, or a Serbian prince is assassinated by a Bosnian, and Serbia is culturally kind of close to Russia. They use kind of the same language and kind of the same alphabet, and whatever. They have a lot of the same culture, and they've been allied over the years. This is also a clashing place between Christianity and Islam. Okay? And so some of these countries here, these Balkan countries, are lean towards Islam, some lean towards Christianity. And there's another problem. There's also a clashing place between the Roman Church and the Greek Church. Okay? So you've got three clashes going on. Okay? You've got a cultural clash, you've got a political clash, and you've got a religious clash. All right. Jump to the end of the war. The Allies win. Okay? Who are they? Well, that's France and England, basically. By this time, Russia is in a mess because it's got a revolution going on and a civil war, and so they're not really participating in much. All right. Austria is divided up. Germany, of course, is punished greatly for its part of the war. Turkey or the Ottoman Empire is demolished, and Turkey rises up. So anyway, you've got these people like Winston Churchill in his younger years, and other people who look at this map, okay, and decide, and not just this part of the map, but the whole map of Europe, and decide we're going to make borders, we're going to make countries, all right? And so, for example, they thought that the solution to all of these countries fighting among themselves was to create a single nation. So they created Yugoslavia out of thin air. Okay? So there was the Albanians, there was the Serbians, the Bosnians, the Croatians, and the Herzegovina, and the Moldavians, I think Moldavians, okay? So these 4 or 5 different countries were smushed together and made into Yugoslavia, all right? It didn't seem to matter to them where various people lived who spoke what language or what religion or whatever. And so they wound up putting together areas where, in the same country, that were Islam and Christian, or Western Christian and Eastern Christian, Greek and Roman, and so and so. And sometimes all three combinations. Places where there were very Russian-leaning type of culture in together with a German-leaning type of culture. This just didn't work. It didn't work. It was a mess. It was a disaster. Until a guy named Tito comes along, and he's very strong-armed. He's a tyrant, okay? And he just holds the thing together by the force of his will, all right? But it doesn't work. It's a lousy solution, all right? They did the same thing down here. They created Iraq out of nothing, okay? And they didn't care where they drew the lines. They just drew them wherever they wanted to. And of course, the French, being victors, they wanted Syria, which was their ally, to be bigger than, say, Iraq in the beginning. So anyway, they didn't care. And so, like, for example, the Kurds say, hey, how come we can't have our own country? Well, you were on the wrong side. You were on the Turk side, okay, or whatever, or the Russian side, or whoever side you were on. You don't got no power. You don't got no voice in this, okay? So the Kurds, they didn't get their own country. Everybody else got their own country. They didn't get the Poles. They were divided all up, okay, and they were smooshed together. And they put a bunch of Germans together in Poland and a bunch of Russians together in Poland, and it was a mess. All right. In general, down through the centuries, this is what has happened after a major conflict: the Napoleonic Wars, the Prussian War, the First World War, okay. And then, of course, the Second World War. People just draw lines wherever they want to draw lines, for whatever reason. I want this chunk of land in my sphere of influence, right? And so I get it. All right, fast forward now. Fast forward to the breakup of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union fell, all the various republics in the Soviet Union became their own independent countries, right? Okay. Russia was very weak at that time. Yeltsin was a drunk, as we know. And so he didn't really put a lot of emphasis or a lot of care or concern into hanging on to or keeping influence. Over the next 20 or 30 years, as Putin came into power, he saw that he thought it was very important, and some of his allies thought it was very important for him to grab these republics again and bring them into the sphere of influence of Russia. Russia has always been paranoid, always, all the way back to when it was first created. The very, very beginning of Russia, way back when in the Middle Ages. It was always paranoid about the West. The Russians always want to be seen as equals to the rest of Europe, but they don't like the rest of Europe. They are Asians. They're not Europeans. I mean, there's a chunk of their country that's in Europe, but it really doesn't matter because they're really Asians. They think like Asians. They act like Asians. They eat like Asians. They drink like Asians. They talk like Asians. They're Asians. Okay? They're not really Europeans. They're Asians. But they want to be Europeans. Okay? So guys like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, they try to act like Europeans. They try to act like the French and the English and everybody else. You want to have kings and thrones and parliaments and, whatever. Okay? But their czars were idiots. Their czars were like the Mongol leaders, okay? Or the Chinese emperors, okay? But this is the problem with Russia. Russia's schizoid personality, okay, split personality. They're Asians, but they want to be Europeans. But at the same time, they're afraid of Europeans. They're deathly afraid of being overtaken by French or English or Germans or Austrians or Norwegians for that matter. Okay, they're always afraid. Because they have an inferiority complex for some reason. I don't know why, but they have an inferiority complex because they were kind of the last. They were kind of the last country to come into the modern age. Okay, they were way behind when Peter the Great started doing stuff. By that time, everybody had the Industrial Revolution and took off and stuff, and Russia was way behind. Okay, so Peter tried to hurry everybody up and get Russia online. But this has always been a problem. Always, they're a split personality. They want to be Europeans. They're in love with Europeans. They're jealous of Europeans. But at the same time, they're scared to death of Europeans. They're always afraid the Europeans are going to take over and rule over them. Okay, they don't want that. Okay, so this is a problem. Well, when they drew the lines, okay, after the Second World War, all right, Stalin, okay, got Ukraine to be much bigger than it used to be. How did he do that? Okay, well, he did that by taking a chunk that was in old Russia and adding it to Ukraine. That way, he would always have a foothold in the Ukraine. Okay, so about 120 to 200 miles, depending on how you look at the map, and I don't have a map of that area, but anywhere from 110, 20 to about 200 miles wide as a strip on the eastern end of Ukraine, that's Russian. The people speak Russian. The people live Russian. Their culture is Russian. Their religion, they're part of the Russian Orthodox Church, not the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which are two different churches. Okay? They're Russians. This is why in the last 10 years, they've been revolting against Kiev, against the central government in Kiev. This province, okay, of Russians has been revolting against Ukraine, okay, because they want to be back and be part of Russia. Okay? Russia wants them to stay in the Ukraine, so they're a buffer. Okay? So there's a buffer zone to protect Russia from Europe. All right? Because they're scared of Europe. And that's also why they don't want Ukraine in NATO, because NATO, of course, is European. All right? So the area is Russian. It's not Ukrainian. It's Russian. It's Russian by history. It's Russian by food, drink, clothes, religion, everything. It's Russian. It's not Ukrainian. It's Russian. Okay? And Russia now says, well, we might as well just take it back. We might as well just take it back. We'll side with the rebels and we'll just take it back. Okay? Ukrainian doesn't want that because they want a buffer between them and Russia, because Russia is a big monster country, huge, gigantic country, all the way to Vladivostok on the Pacific Ocean, okay? And they're afraid of Russia. Okay? Ukrainians and Russians always never gotten along, ever. Okay? And because, again, they're afraid of one another. Or Ukrainians more afraid of Russia. Okay? And so they want to keep that strip that Stalin gave them, okay, to make them bigger, okay? So they want to keep that as a barrier between, a geographical barrier, or a political barrier between them and the big bear, Russia. That's what's going on, okay? Now, what does that have to do with us? Well, not a whole lot. But this is the thing. You remember in the book of Acts, Paul is talking about God and his supervision of the world. And he makes a comment there, I think that's very important for us to remember always. He said, Paul's talking about God, and he says, God makes people to live where he wants them to live, and he designs the borders of their habitations. Okay? In other words, God is overseeing this process. And we can look at the Balkan process, or we can look at down here in the Middle East process, and we can say, what a bunch of dummies those people were. And it's true, humanly speaking. But obviously, there is a purpose of some kind in God's design of all this and allowing these things to happen. God allows Iraq to come into existence, but does not allow the Kurdistan, let's say, to come into existence. Okay, doesn't allow that. He allows Yugoslavia to be created, even though it's a disaster. But at the same time, he causes, let's say, Poland to cease to exist half a dozen times in its history, get gobbled up by Germans and Russians. Okay? In other words, God is in control for whatever reason. Now, we look back far enough and we can see God's working. All right? The problem is we're too close to the situation right now. We really can't see the point. We really can't see what was God attempting to do here. We don't know. We look back 1,000 years, okay, we can see. We can see, for example, it makes perfect sense that God allowed Charles Martel, for example, to win against the Muslims at the Battle of Tours near Paris in 734, I believe it was, or 732, one of the two. We can see that. And that his son then goes and invades the German area, marches all of the pagan Huns down into the Rhine River and baptizes them all. Okay? We can see God's purpose in allowing certain things. If we're far enough away in time, we can see, okay, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Normally, we can't do that unless we're 400 or 500 years away, maybe more sometimes. Okay, it doesn't make any sense to us, humanly speaking, logically speaking, historically speaking, as far as we understand things. But obviously, God is in control. And what Paul said is very true. God designs where these cultures live and their boundaries. Okay? So, on the one hand, you could say, well, Russia should just take that area back because they're all Russians anyway. Right? Or Ukraine would be smart just to say, hey, guys, take it. We don't care. Okay? But they're afraid. So they're afraid, the Russians are afraid, the French are afraid, the Germans are afraid, the British are afraid, and the United States is afraid. The United States is afraid of North Korea, they're afraid of China, they're afraid of everybody. Okay? We're afraid of everybody. Obviously, we're afraid of everybody because we got the biggest Navy in the world. Okay? We've got aircraft carriers off everybody's shores. All right? So, what's the lesson here? What's the lesson what's the spiritual lesson or the theological lesson of the Russian-Ukrainian problem? All right? Real simple. Trust God. That's the lesson. Don't be afraid of man. Trust God. If for example, if the United States really believed what was on our money, in God we trust, all right, we wouldn't have military bases in 37 different countries. Why do we have military bases in all those countries? Because we're afraid. We don't want Pearl Harbor to happen again. Okay? All right? Well, okay. Now that sounds very logical, doesn't it? Sure. It sounds very logical. It sounds very militarily smart. It sounds very strategic and all that. But is it spiritual? No, it's not. It's not. Okay? If we really believed that God was in control, okay, if we really believed that God was ruling everything for the benefit of all believers, okay, we wouldn't be projecting our power all over the world and trying to run everybody's life and deciding, well, you need to be a democracy, you need to be a republic, and yada, 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 yada. We wouldn't be doing that. We wouldn't be doing that. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, of course, we all know, of course, we're not a Christian country. We're not a biblical country. We're not a spiritual country at all. We never have been, for that matter. We like to say we are. We like to put God in the Pledge of Allegiance, and we like to have prayers in Congress, and we like to put God all over our money. But the fact of the matter is, we're pagans. We're just as much a pagan country as Russia ever was, even when it was communist. Okay? That's the actual honest-to-God truth. And all I have to do is just remind everybody of the 12.5 million babies that are aborted every year to prove my point. What Christian nation butchers and murders and chops up innocent unborn children? It's not possible. You cannot say, I love Jesus and I love God and God rules us, and then chop up little kids. Sorry. That's hypocrisy of the highest order. Okay? So why isn't the Russian Orthodox Church or Putin's Orthodox Christianity as good, if not better, than Biden's hypocritical Roman Christianity? I mean, Biden claims to be a Roman Christian, Roman Catholic Christian. He claims to be a Roman Catholic Christian, but he supports abortion up one side and down the other. Okay? Putin does not. Russia does not. Abortion is frowned on in Russia. Russia pays people to have children because they're dying as a society. So who's more Christian? Russia or the United States? Well, based on that, you'd have to say Russia. I mean, the hypocrisy is unbelievable. It's absolutely astonishing. But there it is, right? So whenever these things happen, folks, this is what you have to do. First you have to look back in history, and you have to see what's the background of this. What's the context? All right. And you'll see 9 times out of 10 the context isn't anything like what you thought it was or what the stupid media is telling you. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing you ought to do is remember what Paul said. God decides what the boundaries of countries are and what the boundaries of peoples are. Sometimes the country boundary and the people boundary is not the same, but be that as it may. God decides. And we should not therefore get all worked up and all excited and all, joining one side or the other side on these issues. That's just plain dumb. It's the conservative thing to do to back Ukraine. Not necessarily. I think that's politically the stupid thing to do. The smart thing to do, at least politically, would be for Ukraine to say, hey, take it. We don't want it. We don't want to live with all these crazy Russians anyway. You take it on your own. Be happy. Okay?
Putin would probably change his mind.
Oh, he might. He might, just to be ornery. Yeah, that's possible too, of course. Look at the Palestinian situation. Same thing there. If people truly trusted God, all right, the Jewish state could be anywhere. They were offered territory, various places of the earth, after the Second World War. The Jews were offered territory, various different places in the earth. Here, come, you can have this island, or you can have this area, you can have it, it's yours. You can build your country there, you can be safe from all the nasty Nazis and whatever. And they turned it down. No, we want that particular piece of property. Well, but that's already occupied by people. Too bad. Tough rocks. We'll throw them off their land, which is exactly what they did. Well, if you throw somebody off your land, they're not going to be happy with you, are they? Especially if you don't pay them. Take a look sometime. Go online. You can do this online. Go online and look for a picture of a pre-1948 Jerusalem and pre-1948 Temple Mount. Okay? You know what you'll see? Very simple. Okay? You know how bad a drawer I am, okay? So this is the Temple Mount, okay? Let's call this the Western Wall, all right? Or the Wailing Wall, all right? What you will see, if you will look pre-1948, okay, before 1948, you will see a narrow alley right up next to the Western Wall, maybe 10 feet wide, maybe. And then houses and buildings and even churches, etc., and mosques, yeah, and everything else, right up next to that alley, all the way out, okay, to the edge of the city. That's what you'll see if you get an aerial view or even a map view of Jerusalem before 1948, before the establishment of the Jewish state, right? Then you look a couple years later. A couple years? Yeah, it wasn't that really. No, I take that back. That's not correct. Sorry. 67. Sorry. Wrong war. Look for the map or the picture pre-1967. Okay. That's what you'll see. So, for example, when my grandparents or my grandmother and my dad were on their world trip in 1939, they visited Jerusalem. They told me how dark it was up next to the Wailing Wall because all these houses were right up against it. And you had this little 10-foot space where you could squeeze in there. And of course, Jews were not allowed in Jerusalem for a long time. So there wasn't all that much crowd in there. Okay, but after the war, of course, they were. But in 39, it wasn't that crowded, and yet it was dark. It was very dark. The buildings were way above you, and of course, the Temple Mount is very high, and so the Western Wall is way above you. And it was very, it wasn't nice and smooth, and it was a mess. It had weeds growing all out of it. It was a mess. Okay, so that was in 39. Okay, now, all right, now. Go and look and see after 67. Let's see, 67 war was in spring, I believe. So looking like in the fall of 67 or like January of 68. And you can actually find pictures of this being done in the process. And you will see bulldozers, huge, big D8 cats. Okay, everybody knows what a D8 cat is. That's that one with the big claw behind it, that can dig up stuff. Okay, you see these big D8 cats. And what they did is they just went, they wiped out this entire area. They just bulldozed it. They told people you got, I think it was 7 days or 10 days or whatever it was to get out. You have that, grab your stuff, get out. They didn't buy it from them. They didn't ask them. There was no vote. It was the Israeli army came in the fall of 67 and just bulldozed the entire thing. All the homes, all the churches, synagogues too, mosques too, to make a nice big, what you have today, which is the big square that you see on TV now, and all of the people that are lined up against the wall. Okay? Now, that's just a tiny little example of what happened. Now, if you were one of these people and you lived there, and your father lived there, and your grandfather, and your great-grandfather, and your great-grandfather, and your great-grandfather, and your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, all the way back to 17 whatever, or 16 whatever, okay, and you lived there, well, your family, and maybe you had a little store or something that you sold stuff with trinkets at, whatever, okay, or bread, or whatever, okay, and you were told you gotta get out in a week. Take whatever you want, get out. Where are you going to live? Well, we don't care. You can live anywhere you want to. Well, what are we going to buy it with? We got no money. Well, too bad. Tough rocks. Okay? And then the bulldozers come in there. You would be a little bit PO'd. You would be just a little bit irritated. And especially if you wound up living in Gaza, which is a dump, right? Or you wound up living in some refugee camp in Jordan, which is another dump, right? You would be very unhappy, right? But who knows this today? Nobody. Big secret. Don't say nothing. Okay? This is why I say to people, when you see something happening in the world, whether it's North Korea, whether it's India, Pakistan, whatever it is, do some research. Find out the context of what's going on in these nations. Find out the truth of what was done by somebody or to somebody. And all of a sudden, you will realize that what you're being told to be nice is half truth. To be not so nice is an outright lie and propaganda. Sometimes these people are just ignorant. I think most of the media today, what I told you about Ukraine and Russia, they don't even know. And this too, for that matter. Nobody knows. You ask a typical so-called journalist today, the history of Palestine, they won't be able to tell you. They don't know that. Whatsoever. Okay? Well, never mind passage, I guess, today. Yeah.
Biblically, if a man and his wife separate and get a divorce, biblically, is he allowed to remarry?
Biblically, depends. Okay. In the Bible, there is no such thing as no-fault divorce, as far as the Bible is concerned. Okay? And even used to be, again, this is used to be, in the church, this was true. That's just no longer true in the church. Okay? It used to be that even when the states had switched to no-fault divorce for expedient purposes, the church would still try to determine who did what to whom, who is able to remarry and who is not. Okay? Biblically, the one who is able to remarry is the one not at fault. Okay? The Bible and Jesus and the apostles teach that if you're the one who committed the adultery, and then your wife, let's say, leaves you and it won't take you back anyway, the church and Bible and God basically says, we will allow that. It's not the best scenario, but we will allow that, and we will not burden you any further. However, if you are the guilty party, then the church says, as part of your fruit of repentance, as part of your show of sorrow over your sin, you are not allowed to get remarried. And again, this was a teaching of Jesus himself. Okay, this was also teaching of Moses, right? So it goes all the way back to the very beginning of the giving of the law. Okay, the innocent party is allowed to remarry. The guilty party is not. All right, that's in a nutshell. That's what it is. Now, what basically has happened is the church has basically said, we are not going to get into the business of determining who's at fault and who's not. Now, some churches have done this by legislating it in their church meetings. Other churches, in the case of the Wells, for example, have done this by fiat. That is our practice. Whether we approve it or not, that's our practice. And so your average Lutheran, and it's pretty much the same in Missouri Synod too. Your average Lutheran pastor today, if a couple comes and we're getting divorced, well, gee, that's too bad. Can I give you some counseling or whatever to see if we can fix this? No, it's beyond fixing. Well, all right. Okay, we're going to go our separate ways. Okay. Gee, it's too bad. Anything I can do to help, let me know. And that's it. That's it.
Well, like I said, this had nothing to do with adultery. She just wanted to go back to Washington, and he didn't. And so they divorced.
Well, in a case like that, one or the other would be determined. What I used to do, okay, I don't anymore because it won't be enforced anywhere. It won't be held up, okay. But what I used to do is say, look, to whose advantage is it? Whose disadvantage? I had a case exactly like this. Okay, I had a couple in my congregation in El Paso. They both were bank vice presidents. One was a bank vice president in what later on became Wells Fargo. One was a bank vice president in the Bank of America. Okay, they were bank vice presidents. Okay, one was offered a job in Washington State. One was offered a job, I think, in New York. Was it New York or New Jersey? One of the two. Or Connecticut. Maybe it was Connecticut. Anyway, Eastern State. So they were offered almost at the same time, within a week of each other. They came to me and they said, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. I said, well, from a scriptural standpoint, I'll tell you, what I think should be done. But, you're going to make your own decision, obviously. All right. I said, I think what should be done is you should follow, one should follow the other in the best situation for the family. What's the best situation for the family? What's the best place for schools? What's the best, are you going to get paid the same? Or one going to get paid a little bit more than the other? What's the work situation? You're going to have to commute a long ways and be away from the family for a long time. How about the job? Is the job going to be one where you're traveling all the time, or the job not? That's what you guys need to look at. And so they did. And they came back and they said they're almost exactly the same. And so I said, let the husband choose, because he's the head of the house.
These individuals are in their 80s.
Oh, well, at that point, it's kind of a moot. But what? Just so you know what finally happened, she said, okay, I'll go along with that. He can make the choice. And then he said, well, I choose to go to Washington State with her. I don't want to live in the East Coast. Well, why didn't you say so? All right. Any other questions? So don't be concerned, you guys. The media, it's like anything else going on in the country. Okay, if there were only 20,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, this wouldn't be a big deal, and nobody would care. Everybody would be paying more attention to the North Koreans launching missiles. All right, or everybody would be paying more attention to the trouble in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. Or everybody would be paying more attention to the mess in Baghdad right now going on with the elections in Iraq. Okay, the media picks and chooses what it thinks will be the most dramatic, and that's what it plays up. All right, don't get caught up in that. Okay, don't. And if you want to get caught up in that, fine. But again, take my advice. Do some research. Google, Ukraine, whatever. Google history of whatever, and find out the truth of what's going on before you get all exercised. And then take it to the Lord in prayer and go about your business. All right, Anglicans. Let's talk, since we're talking this kind of stuff, who needs papers? Anybody? Nobody needs papers? All right. 151. Let's talk a little bit about this very topic. Let's talk about this very topic, about how God controls history. This is a perfect example. I don't know that you could have a better example of God controlling history than the English Reformation. Okay? Except maybe Luther's Reformation, but that one we know. This one also. God is in control. Why he does the things he does, don't ask me. All I'm saying is that you can definitely see there is no such thing as accidents. Okay? The Anglicans acknowledge that the repudiation of papal authority by Henry VIII of England led to the Church of England existing as a separate entity. They also believe that it is in continuity with the pre-Reformation Church of England. So they will agree that Henry started the new church. But they will also say, but really, we are just a continuation of the old church, the Roman church. And they might even not say Roman, they might even say apostolic. Okay? Quite apart from its distinct customs and liturgies, the organizational machinery of the Church of England was in place by the time the Synod of Hertford in 672-73, when the English bishops were for the first time able to act as one body under the leadership of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now again, 600s, the church is as much Celtic as it is Roman. Oh, come on. Remind me to unplug this stupid thing next time. Man, it irritates me. Calls on Sunday morning. Ridiculous. Yeah, fine. Where was I? Oh, yeah. The bishops who make up this synod of Hertford are some of them in background, Celtic background, some of them in Roman background. Henry's act of restraint of appeals and the acts of supremacy declared that the English crown was the only supreme head in earth of the Church of England, called Ecclesia Angelica, okay, or Angelicana. So what Henry did was not a theological thing in truth. It was a political thing. In other words, he went to Parliament and he said, and now understand, of course, in pre-Reformation world, the church, again, the church of the king, whatever the king was the church of the whole country. And remember that over in Germany, Germany didn't exist as a nation yet. It was just a patchwork of all these very different duchies and whatever, okay? That the prince or the duke or the earl or whoever he was, by this time, if he was Roman, his province or his area was duchy or whatever was Roman. If he was Lutheran, it was Lutheran. Okay, so that did not change. The combination of church and state, the fact that the church and state were one, did not change. That had been true since Constantine, okay, 325, 313 A.D. Okay, so that had been true for more than 1,000 years. And that was the normal way of thinking about it. Okay? Understand, you got to remember, Americans on the face of the earth are weird. Okay? In more ways than one. We're strange. Okay? Japan has an official religion. Okay? China has an official religion, which is atheism. Okay? Russia has an official religion, which is Russian Orthodoxy. Ukraine has an official state religion supported by the state, which is Ukrainian Orthodoxy. Okay? Norway has a state church, it's Lutheranism. Sweden has a state church. Denmark has a state church. England has a state church. Ireland, Scotland. Every country on the globe pretty much has a state church that's run by the state or supported by the state. America is one of the few places in the world that does not have a state church, okay, or a state-declared religion. Okay, India, obviously, it's different and so on and so forth. And Muslim countries, of course, it's Islam, okay? But you just understand how weird we are and how strange, how hard it is for the rest of the world to understand us. They don't get it. Like we claim to be a Christian country, but, their question would be, well, if you're a Christian country, how come your pastors aren't paid by the state? How come your churches aren't erected by the state? Well, it's a good thing they aren't. It'd be even worse than the cracks in this one. But you get my point. Okay. All right. So what Henry did was the normal thing to do. You go to the political rulers of your country or whatever, and you pass a new rule or a new law. And the fact that England, of course, was in some ways kind of a representative democracy or representative republic, whatever, or representative monarchy, however you want to put it. It had parliament. It had parliament for 300 years already. But in those days, parliament pretty much did what the king or queen wanted to do, 9 times out of 10. But still, they were there. All right, so this was a political thing to do, okay, to establish the king and or queen as the head of the church. Okay, all right. In order to why? Well, look at this. To repress and extirpate all errors, heresies, and other enormities and abuses heretofore used in the same. So the idea was, okay, transubstantiation is wrong, indulgences are wrong, purgatory is wrong, penance, the way it's carried out, is wrong, etc., etc., etc. Having priests not be married is wrong. And so those are abuses. And so we give the political head of the country the ability to end those abuses. Right? That's the purpose. That's why the king or the queen is the head of the church in England. Not for theological reasons, but for reasons of peace, I guess you would say, unity. In other words, anybody goes out and teaches something different, you get slammed on by the state, boy. It's the government that comes down on your head. Okay? So, difference between the United States and Canada, for example. In Canada, the law of the land is that to say homosexuality is a sin is breaking the law. That's the law of the land passed by Parliament. All right? That's the law of the land. So, when a pastor stands up and says homosexuality is a sin, he's not just irritating some people maybe in his congregation, he is actually literally breaking the law. And there are pastors in Canada today who are in jail, literally. They might be out on bail, I don't know, but they were arrested and put in jail. Pastors been put in jail in Canada because they broke the law. The law was passed by the Parliament in Quebec, I guess it is, huh? Yeah. And so that's the difference. Now, you wouldn't get necessarily, depends on how it was framed, of course, but you wouldn't get necessarily something like that here. Here, it would have to go through Congress, of course, and we'd have to convince Congress that this is, as some laws have been proposed to do, hate speech. Okay. Now, so far, those laws have not been passed. Okay. But it has less to do with sin and less to do with any kind of theological determination than it does with what, well, that's mean or that's not nice, or whatever. But it could happen, right? And then we would be again, or I would be again, in trouble with the state. A member called last night interestingly enough, or yesterday at noon, at lunchtime, one of our members called and said, he was talking about what happened in Canada, and he said, what would you do? And I would say, well, I would go to jail, obviously. Okay. Now, frankly, it doesn't come up all that often in the texts anyway. Sometimes I might throw the comment in there just to prove my point that America is not really very Christian or biblical. But that's I can do that or not do that. I mean, you can pick 10 other subjects. You don't need to pick on that one. So that's the difference. All right. Okay. So the king in England, or the queen today, is the head for enforcement reasons. That's why she is a head of the church. Now, Queen Elizabeth, of course, like with everything else, modern day monarchs don't really intrude themselves into affairs in the country usually. Very rarely, if at all. But she could, I guess, if she wanted to. If Queen Elizabeth felt that having lesbian priests in the Anglican Church was, an abuse, okay, she could take some action. Obviously, she doesn't care. Okay. The development of 39 Articles of Religion, which is, their 39 Articles is kind of like our Augsburg Confession, right? And the passage of the Acts of Uniformity, culminating in the Elizabethan religious settlement, resulted by the end of the 17th century in a church that described itself as both Catholic and Reformed, with the English monarch as the supreme government. So, in other words, there was about 100 years, give or take, of machinations back and forth, including a civil war. And a bloody conflict, and many martyrs on both sides. When a Protestant was head of the country, Romans were executed willy-nilly, whatever, burned at the stake, drawn and quartered, blah, blah, blah. When a Roman was head of the government, the same thing happened to Protestants. So it was a very nasty situation. And you have to understand why. Okay, let me pause for a minute and understand why. Again, today, we have a very eclectic view of Christianity. In other words, I do not say that, you have to be a member of the Lutheran Church in order to be saved, obviously. Okay? Although I have had members who have thought that, okay, over the years. You do not have to be Wisconsin Synod. You don't have to be Missouri Synod. You can be a Baptist and go to heaven. You can even be a Roman and go to heaven. Although, again, I've had members who denied that vociferously and argued with me greatly. But in those days, that was not thought. It was not thought possible to pray to Mary and go to heaven. It was not thought possible not to pray to Mary and to go to heaven. Okay? This is what these people believed. Okay? So you understand, if the Protestants are in charge, you're a Roman, okay, you feel that doing your Roman Mass is the only thing keeping you on the road to heaven, and you will not be told no. And so you might go to the Protestant church service, but then in your basement, you will hold a Roman Mass with your Roman friends and whatever priest you could find, usually a guy hiding in anonymity. And so you will find in English homes, in English manors, all throughout England, built in those days, or even before that, you will find secret rooms where masses can be held. I forget what they're called. There's a special name for them. Priest holes? Yeah. Yeah, priest holes. Okay, priest holes. Yeah. So these exist in all over the country, okay? From Scotland to Ireland to England to Wales, everywhere, okay? By the same token, when Bloody Mary was on the throne, Protestants would go, usually they were poor, they weren't as wealthy as the Romans, but Protestants would worship separately, and they would try not to even attend a Roman Mass, okay, which you could kind of get away with because that was kind of the par for the course anyway. But they would meet out in the forest somewhere, okay, and have a religious service. So this is what you had to do. So understand that the reason that people are killing people, and the reason people are putting people in jail and putting thumb screws on them and ripping their tongues out and everything else, is because of their eternal destination. They thought they needed to do this to protect themselves and their children and their families for their place in heaven. Okay? Same reason, even in our own recent times, why the people in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, for example, the Protestants, killed the Catholics, and the Catholics or Romans killed the Protestants. And if you read the accounts that were written in that area, again, not a journalist imposing himself, but just what was written by those people at that time, this is what they believed. So you have to understand that. Just as you have to understand that the reason why people may blow themselves up, somewhere, is to get to paradise. Okay, if they're Islam. All right. So again, Americans, we don't get this. We don't get this because a long time ago, Americans decided everybody's going to heaven, or heaven doesn't exist, or whatever, or hell doesn't exist. Okay, Americans long ago gave up being, I guess, biblical Christians in general. That is the general population, and so we don't. That's why we don't fight over religion. That's why the war between the states was not over religion. It could have been, very easily could have been, but it wasn't. And that's why. Because even by that time, especially in the Yankee side, especially in the northern side, everybody goes down. The Congregationalist movement had begun in the early 1800s and had taken over pretty much all the North. And by the time of the war between the states, most of the mainline denominations in the North were what we would call today very progressive and liberal. And so there wasn't any religion to fight over. Most people do not know this. Most people have no clue about this. But it's true. It's the fact. Right? So we don't have those kinds of problems. But in Europe, they did have those kinds of problems because if you're a Roman and you take over the government and you force me to go to Mass, all right, and you keep me from doing what I think I need to do religiously, I'm going to go to hell, I think. And so are my wife and my family. And by George, I don't want that. So I'm going to pick up a gun and shoot your butt to keep you from doing that. Okay? This is serious stuff with these people. This is big time stuff. You're talking about your eternal destination here. People get pretty serious. I was asked one time when I was teaching in El Paso, I was asked by the school board in El Paso to explain, since I was a minister, but they knew I was a minister, but I was also a teacher, to explain to the school board why there was such opposition to teachers coming out, announcing themselves as gay. And so I went before the board and I explained the same thing. I said, you have to understand the conservative Romans, the conservative Jews, the conservative Christians in our areas are scared to death that their children will look up to this person that they've come to maybe love, okay, especially little kids and they're, third grade teacher or whatever. Look at this person. This person comes out, quote unquote, maybe not in front of the class, but just in public, and says, oh, I'm gay now, okay, and it gets back to the class, and so the kids look to the teacher and they say, here's this person that I really, really like, and I really think is great, and she or he is saying that this is normal, this is fine, this is good. Yes, I'm Mrs. Smith, and I have a wife, and she's also Mrs. Smith, okay? And the parents, therefore, are scared to death that this will urge or prompt or move or encourage their children to be thinking down those lines. And in their religion, in their churches, be then involved in unrepentant lifestyle, unrepentant sin, and lose saving faith. Okay? And once I explained that to the school board, they understood. They, oh, okay. So you're saying these people actually believe? And that's the way they put it, but I understood. They said, they actually believe you go to heaven or hell based upon being gay or not? And I said, yeah. And you're not going to blast that out of their heads. So you have to walk very, very carefully with these people. Otherwise, you're going to have a revolt on your hands. So they put it off. I don't know, they did it, they finally allowed it, 15 years ago or so, but they put it off for a while. But this is what's going on. Okay. Another paragraph. English Reformation was initially driven by the dynastic goals of Henry VIII, who, in his quest for a consort wife who would bear him a male heir, found it expedient to replace papal authority with the supremacy of the English crown. It's really too bad. Had the guy been Muslim and he could have had up to 5 wives, I'm sure one of them would have probably produced a male heir. But, okay, it wasn't so. The early legislation focused primarily on questions of temporal and spiritual authority and supremacy. However, the subsequent legislation, that is by Parliament, put a decidedly Protestant spin on later changes. The introduction of the Great Bible in 1538 brought a vernacular translation of Scripture into English churches. The King James Bible was not the first English Bible. That does not come, King James Bible does not come about until 1611. This is 1538. Okay? The dissolution of the monasteries and the seizure of their assets in 1540 brought huge amounts of church land and property under the jurisdiction of the crown and ultimately into the hands of English nobility. So what the king did, in order to cement his power, he would confiscate a monastery. Nice big building, nice lot of rooms for education and whatever, maybe nice grounds and all the game and whatever on those grounds to support, and maybe fields of crops and stuff to support that monastery. And so he would confiscate the whole thing and he would turn it over to some guy, some lord in the House of Lords who backed him up. I got to find out who this is now. Hello? See? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, definitely got to undo that on Sunday mornings. I don't know. I know how the old one used to work. I don't know how this new one works. Okay. I know there's a button on some of them to get rid of the ring. What was it? Yeah. So he would say, hey, Lord of Essex, how would you like a little more land? Thanks for supporting me in that supremacy idea, right? It's kind of like the president today, Hey, Senator so-and-so, thanks for supporting me on that. I'll make sure your state gets a new Air Force base. Or I'll make sure that the next aircraft carrier is based in San Diego or San Francisco or whatever. Yeah, that's how it works. That's how it's always worked, folks. That's how it's always, even before there was Congress, even before there was parliaments, that's how it always worked. Hey, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You be nice to me, I'll be nice to you. The way it's always worked. People talk about the corruption in Congress. Hello? It's always been corrupted. It's been corrupted from the day it was created.
Somebody came out and said that the Congress people, senators and representatives should have signs on their back for who is supporting.
Oh yeah, right. They should be like
the same as the
cars in the NASCAR. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
That really would be a good idea.
Yeah, bought and paid for by Exxon Oil. Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. Except they're not big enough. Their suits are not big enough for all of the patches. Okay. They simultaneously removed the greatest centers of loyalty to the Pope and created vested interests, which made powerful material incentive to support a separate Christian church in England under the rule of the crown. So the politicians and the lords of the manors, shall we say, it was in their interest to get out from underneath the Pope anyway. So Henry didn't have to do a lot of arm twisting. He said, hey, this will be good for our country, fill up the coffers of the treasury, it'll pad all of you guys' expense accounts or whatever, your riches. We'll get out from underneath this Italian guy telling us what to do. And up to that point, popes had all been Italian for a long time already, and they didn't like that. And many times the popes were under the influence of France because France was right next to Italy, and French kings were always trying to make the pope do what they wanted. So the English were always kind of the last ones out, the kind of odd ones out, and they didn't like that. Okay, there was only one English pope in the entire history of the papacy. And he was back in 500 years before this. All right, we'll pick it up at paragraph 8. But again, folks, and we haven't seen it really yet, but we will see more so how God is in charge of this process. And he really is in charge of the political machinations of this world. Okay? Let's pray. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.